So we're just proud as far as like where we've come from and how we were with our finances compared to how we are now. So we also talk about keeping things real and transparent on this channel, and the truth is, we haven't always been in the position that we are in now with trying to pay off our mortgage. When my husband and I first got together or got married, our credit scores were very low, like embarrassingly low. Our credit scores were in the 500s. Starting out, we had a lot of things going on with our credit that we really had to dig ourselves out of. And in this video, we're going to talk about what we did to improve our credit scores and to have a better credit report overall. Do with this information what you will, but we're really just talking about our experiences and what worked for us with trying to have a better credit score. So like I said, we both started in the 500 range. My issues with my credit came from things like collections and just not having a very long credit history overall. Whereas my husband, on the other hand, had credit history for several years, but the accounts that he had on his credit report were not in good standing. He had a student loan, just one of the many student loans that he had, which was in default. It was for over $30,000 and he had never made a payment on it by the time we got married. So that was not in good standing and it brought his credit score down a good amount. With myself and the collections that I had, those came from different things like phone bills or paying for cell phones that kind of was more of a civil matter between me and someone else, and apartment, like moving out of an apartment and still owing them money, things like that. And then also I had a car loan from the time that I turned 19. I had just gotten that car whenever I began starting to work on my credit, so it was barely helping with my credit and improving it. So I was still in the very early stages of that loan. So there was a few different things that we did to try to improve our credit score. Since we owed this money, we wanted to pay it back. I figured that just starting there and starting with paying back some of the delinquencies on our credit, that might help bring things up. So the amount of money that I owed, like I talked about before, paying off a phone and apartments, both of those individually were under $1,000. So it wasn't too overwhelming, but what I did do to start was contacting some of these companies that I owed money to and just trying to explain my situation and make arrangements to pay back the money that I owed. I knew at the time when I made these arrangements and being a single income individual, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to pay a lot of money or pay it very quickly for that matter. So I contacted them with the mindset of paying what I could, which that could have been $50 a paycheck or $100, but I knew that if I ran into extra money, I could always just try to pay more. So originally I would set up payment arrangements for $100 every time I got paid, and then if I happened to get extra money or, overtime, what have you, I would contact them and just try to pay extra, and it would get paid off that much faster. I actually owed two different phone companies. One because I had, like I said, a civil dispute with a roommate that I had, and I allowed them to get a phone on my phone plan. And then of course, after we fell out, I'm then responsible for that. And then in addition to that, I had switched phone companies, and I don't know if they still do this, but this was probably about 8-9 years ago, one company would give you like a prepaid card to pay off the other company and like make a switch from one company to another. But of course I didn't use that money to pay for the early termination fees. I just went out and spent all that money that was on the card. It was probably about $350 or so, maybe close to $400. And so I just spent all that money and I did not pay the early termination fees. So of course I have all the stuff that I bought with this free card that I got, but now I owe another company hundreds of dollars because of that. So it's just thinking about some of the stuff that I used to do. It shows my mindset and where I was with my financial journey, just not all the way there yet, and spending money just recklessly for the amount of money that I was bringing in, which at that time I was probably working like part-time jobs. So the next thing that we did, this was for working on my husband's credit. Like I said, he had a student loan that was over $30,000. This was Sallie Mae. So we made arrangements with them. However, this one was a lot bigger, $30,000. It was a lot of money to us at the time where we're just getting established in our careers and just making enough money to really fully pay our bills and have money left over at this point. So we called Sallie Mae, we made an arrangement with them. However, at this time, if you're new to our channel, $30,000 wasn't all that my husband had in student loan. It wasn't even half of it. So he owed a lot of money in student loans. So we wanted to make arrangements with them, but we knew that we also had a lot of other payments to make at the same time. So we made a very small arrangement with them to start out, which was $165 a month, which, in order to get to $30,000, it was going to take years to pay that off. But we knew we had to start somewhere. They also, since the loan was in default and it was so terribly delinquent, they let us have a 0% interest rate. And our plan was to just continue doing the minimum and paying extra if we could, but we really didn't. We really just focused on paying that $165 for several years. And actually, when we did finally become consumer debt free in 2019, this was the last payment that we ended up paying was to Sallie Mae. And what we did was, again, because the loan was so seriously delinquent, they allowed us to settle the amount that we owed. We ended up settling for about $9,000 less than the balance that we actually owed, which I say it's a good thing, but it's also never a good thing to let your loan get that far past due. It is what it is. This was something that the payments began needing to be made before I really even came into the picture. So there wasn't a whole lot that I could do. But once we did become married and obviously all of our finances were joined together, his debt became my debt. So we made a plan to start paying on it. He had to stop ignoring the phone calls at that point. We need to actually make arrangements to pay this debt off at some point. Called them, spoke with a very nice individual. But ultimately, the severity of the situation was that if there weren't arrangements made during that time, of course, there's other collection efforts that student loan companies can do at that point. I'm sure you're all aware. I know people that have had their wages garnished for not paying their student loans, not making arrangements with them. If you continue to ignore them, it doesn't go away. And it seemed like we were very close to getting to that point if we had not made these arrangements. Luckily, we made arrangements with them. The $165 a month, it was all they really asked of us at that point. Really, they just wanted to make arrangements before it really just got out of control. So this was about 2016 when we first started these arrangements. We continued on with the $165 a month for 2 to 3 years. And once we had paid off all of our other consumer debt, we then began saving as much money as we could. And then once we got close enough to where we could settle the amount of money, or they would let us, have this balance considered paid in full for a lot lesser amount than what we actually owed. That's what we ended up doing. Honestly, just so grateful for that, because at that point, it does report to the credit that it was settled, but it's considered paid in full. At that point, you're done. You don't have to pay anything else. And just even beginning those arrangements, at that point, we noticed that it would then no longer be considered that there was late payment on the account. So with doing that, they did have to end up sending us something in the mail, which is called a 1099, which is typically any type of cancellation of debt. We claimed it on our taxes, so it's considered like income. That is something that you may have to deal with if that's a route that you end up taking yourself. We ended up doing that. We felt it was worth it regardless. Still almost $10,000 less that we ended up having to pay. Aside from the late payments that we had, that was just stacking up on our credit, there was other things that we decided to do to also try to improve our credit. Me, myself, I got my first secured credit card and the limit was $300. So that's a secured card, if you're not familiar, is where you give money to the bank in good faith. So that way they then give you a credit limit of $300 if you put $300 deposit. If you do more, whatever the amount you put down is your deposit. So I did that, and I would try to keep my utilization below 30%, which isn't easy because $300 isn't a whole lot of money. But one of the things that I did do with the secured card that I had was paying attention to your cycle date. Your cycle date is the day that your credit card company will report to the credit bureau. It's listed on your statement. It's the closing date of your statement. So typically, if you're wanting to have a certain balance report to the credit bureau, what we would do is ensure that the balance was paid down to a small percentage on that date or before that date. So that way, by the time it reported an amount that we would want it to be, or that was under a certain amount of money. So I had my first secured card, and then the second one I ended up getting with the same bank a few months later, just doing the same thing. After a certain amount of time, that credit line, they ended up giving you, the deposit back, and then our credit line at that point continued to go up after you've essentially proved to them that you can have on-time payment history and things of that nature. But as time goes on, and then we ended up getting more cards, credit cards, we would then be able to easily have our utilization be under a certain amount, which also helped. So from 30% and trying to keep it under 30, we would try to keep it under 10. And then where we're at now, we typically don't go above like 5% of our utilization. We just don't charge a whole lot. And like we said before, we only charge things that we already plan to buy, and we pay that off at the end of the month. So sometimes the amount that's reporting to the credit bureau is very small just because of how we do our budgeting and bills and things like that. The continued on-time payment history with not only the credit cards, but then the car loan I talked about. On-time payment history is super important. You want to do everything you can to make sure an account is not a month past due, because at that point is typically when it would then report to the credit bureau. Luckily, we haven't had that issue with any credit cards or any car loans or anything like that. Since we really have gotten on top of our finances, our payment history is something that we've really been able to keep where it's supposed to be. Now with where we're at, with us now being above the 800s on our credit score, it's ironic because we're not really using our credit like that. Right now, we actually have 3 credit cards total, and that's just us keeping things simple as possible for us. Mainly 2 of those cards we mainly just use for the purpose of cash back and just trying to maximize the amount of cash back we earn. Another thing that I've noticed with our credit reports, but we're not really focusing on it, is just that we don't have very many credit inquiries. Like I said, we don't use it a whole lot. I noticed that when we were in the process of building this home, they did have to pull our credit a couple of times. So after that fell off, right now with where we're at, we just have about 1, which is again one of the credit cards that we ended up getting last year. Moving forward, we don't plan to use our credit really, so we're really just continue to do what we do. And for the time that we do end up needing to use it in the future, it's at the place that we'd like it to be. So either way, if we plan to use it or not, of course, we want to keep it in the best possible standing that we can. So we're just proud as far as where we've come from and how we were with our finances compared to how we are now with trying to pay off our house. Our credit score definitely helped, of course, with closing on this home. At that time, whenever we were in the process of closing on it, they told us that they would take the lowest credit score, and they said that that was about 700 at that time. So I do believe that on-time payment history definitely helps because we've never had a late mortgage payment, and it's just continuously been reporting to the credit bureau every month. So if you enjoyed this video, please like the video, please subscribe if you are new, and we will see you in our next one.